Good evening, and welcome to News of the World. It's Friday, July 17th. Tonight we drift slowly across 28 countries, from France to Germany. There's nothing you need to do, and nowhere you need to be. Settle in and let the world turn. France finds itself in a match nobody quite wants to play, but one that carries its own quiet weight. The World Cup's third-place playoff, that strange consolation prize, has France facing England, and though neither side dreamed of being here, the occasion refuses to be ordinary. For Didier Deschamps, the longtime manager, this is his last dance on the international touchline. Years of shaping this team, and now one final 90 minutes. Then there's Kylian Mbappé, still chasing a record, still hungry even in a game that isn't the final. That pursuit gives the night a thread of meaning beyond the bronze medal. France arrived here after a semi-final loss to Spain that still stings. Fans have rallied around a petition demanding a replay, furious over a key decision, the kind of grievance that lingers, that makes a third-place game feel less like closure and more like unfinished business. But football moves on, whether the hurt settles or not. England on the other side of the pitch brings its own story, its own disappointments, and an old rivalry that needs no staging. So there will be something to watch for, even in a match the calendar never quite knows how to place. A manager saying goodbye, a striker reaching for a number. Two countries sharing a field one more time before the summer empties out. If you're still with me, you might understand sometimes the games that matter least on paper are the ones that stay with you longest. Guyana these days is a country thinking about what lies beneath its seabed. The government is advancing new oil exploration blocks, opening fresh stretches of Atlantic waters for the companies that have already transformed this small South American nation into one of the fastest-growing economies on Earth. ExxonMobil's expansion here has been the story everyone watches, and now there are new blocks to be mapped, new agreements to be drawn. It's a country learning, in real time, what sudden wealth means and what it asks of you. And Guyana is thinking beyond extraction too. President Irfan Ali has spoken with Trinidad and Tobago about refining Guyanese oil there, which would weave two Caribbean neighbors closer together, one with the resource, the other with the infrastructure. There's something steady in that, a recognition that you don't have to do everything alone. Meanwhile, the land itself carries on as it always has. Rice farmers are receiving support from the government, billions of Guyanese dollars, to help them weather global price pressures. The rice fields don't pause for oil booms. And deep in the rainforest, inside an army ant colony, soldier ants rush at a camera lens, guarding their queen in the dark. That's Guyana tonight. A country standing at the edge of something enormous, still holding its older rhythms, its farms and forests, alongside the weight of what's coming. If you're still with me, we'll move on now, gently, to the next place. Ireland has decided that Dublin Airport can welcome more travelers through its doors. For some time now, there's been a limit on how many passengers could pass through in a year, a cap that sat there like a low ceiling on a room that wanted to be bigger. This week, Ireland enacted a law to lift it. It's the kind of decision that sounds simple, but carries a lot of weight. Dublin Airport is the country's main gateway, the place where most visitors arrive and where most Irish people leave from or come home to. When that doorway is constrained, everything feels it. Tourism, business, family visits, the rhythm of coming and going that an island nation knows well. A cap like this usually exists for a reason: noise, traffic, the feel of a place changing faster than people would like. Those concerns don't disappear with a new law. But the government has decided that the country needs the room, that Dublin, as a capital and a hub, can't afford to hold at a fixed number while demand keeps growing. So the ceiling rises. What that means in practice, how many more flights, how many more people, how the surrounding neighborhoods are cared for, will unfold in the months and years ahead. For now, Ireland has opened the door a little wider and is trusting it can manage what comes through. Brunei is a small country on the north coast of Borneo, and these days it is marking a milestone for the man who has led it for nearly 6 decades. Sultan Hassan al-Bolkiah has turned 80, and with that birthday, he holds a distinction few can claim. He is the world's longest reigning living monarch. He has been Brunei's guiding figure through independence, through the stewardship of oil wealth, through the slow shaping of a modern state that still holds tightly to its traditions. The occasion was marked with a grand military parade, soldiers marching in formal precision beneath the tropical heat. Greetings arrived from across the region and beyond, from Singapore, reaffirming old ties, from India, where he is seen as a partner in the country's eastward outlook, from Cambodia and others who have watched his long tenure with respect. Brunei also used the season to quietly widen its diplomatic circle, establishing new relations with Bhutan and holding talks with representatives from Afghanistan. There is something steady about a place that has known one ruler for so long. For Bruneians, the Sultan is not a distant figure. He is woven into the rhythm of national life, his birthday now formally observed as Sultan's Day. And so on the coast of Borneo, the flags stay up a little longer, the parades pass, and an 80-year-old reign continues, unhurried, into whatever comes next. Sierra Leone has set aside a treason case against its former president, Ernest Bai Koroma, bringing a quiet close to a prosecution that had drawn attention across the region. The charges had loomed over the country's political life, a weight that now lifts, at least formally. For a nation that has worked hard to hold itself together after years of conflict, the decision carries meaning beyond the courtroom. It is, in its way, a gesture towards space for politics to breathe, for old tensions to settle rather than sharpen. The Sierra Leone Peace Commission has been urging exactly this kind of patience, calling for dialogue and unity over words that divide. Their voice matters here, a reminder that the country's peace is something tended, not simply assumed. Ernest Bai Koroma's place in Sierra Leone's story is not a small one. To see the most serious charge against him withdrawn is to watch a country choose, perhaps, the slower path of reconciliation over the harder path of prosecution. There will be those who disagree, and those who feel relief, and that too is part of how a nation moves forward. If you're still with me, consider what it means to set something down, not because it was light, but because carrying it had become its own burden. Sierra Leone knows that better than most, and tonight, that knowledge sits quietly in the air like a long exhale at the end of a difficult day. Venezuela is pulling itself from the rubble these days, and the work is immense. A series of catastrophic earthquakes has claimed close to 5,000 lives, a number so large it's hard to hold in the mind, each one a person, a family, a name. Rescue and recovery crews continue working through what the shaking left behind, and aid is arriving from beyond Venezuela's borders. Landing craft have delivered supplies to damaged shores. The United Nations World Food Program is on the ground, offering meals as a kind of first comfort to families in crisis. Far away in Texas, nursing faculty at Baylor University have been gathering medical supplies to send south. The earthquakes have also shattered an economy that was already fragile, and the country's future, including its long-standing push for democratic change, now sits in limbo, overshadowed by the immediate need to survive, to shelter, to rebuild. Even in the midst of real suffering, a false image circulated online. A dog said to be protecting a child in the wreckage. It wasn't true, but its spread said something about how deeply people wanted to find hope in the destruction. If you're still with me, hold Venezuela gently tonight. The earth has been unkind and the work ahead is long, but aid is moving. Hands are reaching, and somewhere in the wreckage, people are finding each other again. Barbados has reached out across the water to Martinique this week, signing a cooperation agreement that joins two Caribbean neighbors in shared purpose. The details are still settling into place, but the gesture itself carries weight. Martinique sits to the northwest of Barbados, a French island with its own rhythms and governance, and the ties between these places run deep through history, through trade, through family names that echo on both shores. Agreements like this tend to be quiet things. They don't make much noise in the wider world. But they open doors for collaboration in the areas that shape daily life, and for two islands separated by a short stretch of sea, that kind of openness matters. Barbados has been extending itself in recent years, strengthening relationships across the region, and this latest step fits that pattern. It's a reminder that the Caribbean, for all its scattered geography, is stitched together by countless small acts of connection. If you're still with me, picture the two islands, their coastlines facing one another across blue water, and the slow, patient work of neighbors choosing to cooperate. Somewhere in the offices where this was signed, someone is already thinking about what comes next, and the night carries on, warm and unhurried, as it tends to in that part of the world. Niger sits at the edge of the Sahel, where the rain is unreliable and the Niger River threads through like a promise the land is still trying to keep. This week, the country is moving forward with something called the Niger Integrated Water Security Platform Project. The details are still taking shape, but the aim is plain enough: to bring steadier, safer water to communities that have learned to live with too little of it. If you've traveled along the Niger River Road, you know how much life gathers at the water's edge. Farms, markets, children filling cans, herders bringing animals down to drink. Water here isn't a background detail, it's the whole arrangement. So a project like this isn't only about pipes or infrastructure. It's about giving people a little more certainty in a place where certainty has always been scarce. The Sahel is a belt of land that stretches across Africa, south of the Sahara, and Niger sits right in its dry heart. Climate shifts have made the rains harder to predict. Wells run low. Rivers shrink in the long months before the wet season returns. A water security platform in practical terms means trying to plan better to understand where the water is, who needs it, and how to make it last. If you're still with me, picture a quiet effort underway in a country that doesn't often make the headlines for reasons like this. No crisis tonight, just people working on something that matters, slowly, in a place where slowly is the only way things get done. And the river, for now, keeps moving. The Bahamas, scattered across the northern edge of the Caribbean, will soon see a new piece of energy infrastructure take shape on its shores. Shell has confirmed its final investment decision to build an LNG regasification terminal in the island nation, a facility designed to receive shipments of liquefied natural gas, warm it back into its gaseous state, and feed it into regional energy networks. For a country that has long depended on imported fuel to keep the lights on, it's the kind of project that could quietly shift the math of everyday energy costs. The decision signals Shell's broader push into the Caribbean, where several nations are looking to natural gas as a cleaner alternative to the diesel and heavy fuel oil that have traditionally powered their grids. Details about the terminal's location, timeline, and capacity remain to be shared, but the commitment itself is firm, the paperwork signed, the capital allocated. In a region where large investments often stall between announcement and groundbreaking, that matters. If you're still with me, picture it: a stretch of Bahamian coastline, the slow approach of a gas carrier, and the quiet hum of infrastructure meant to last. For now, the islands carry on as they always have, with the sea close and the trade winds steady and something new taking root. Burkina Faso, a landlocked country in the heart of West Africa, has received new financing from the World Bank aimed at expanding economic opportunities and strengthening social protection systems. The details of the package remain limited, but the intent is clear: to widen the space where ordinary Burkinabe can build livelihoods, and to shore up the safety nets that catch people when times are hard. It's a country that could use the steadiness. Burkina Faso has faced years of insecurity that have displaced communities and strained food supplies. Hunger remains a persistent concern, especially in rural areas where families have been pushed from their land. In that context, social protection isn't an abstract policy term. It's the difference between a household weathering a difficult season and not. The financing arrives at a time when the country is navigating its place in the world, deepening ties within the Sahel, reshaping relationships with international partners, and quietly pursuing modernization at home, from digital governance to healthcare initiatives. But the story worth carrying into the night is the simpler one. A country where many are doing it tough, and a modest infusion of support aimed at helping people hold on and maybe find a foothold. Sometimes that's what progress looks like. Not loud, not sudden, just steady. Fiji has been quietly drawing a new line in its relations with Australia, as the two nations formalize a defense pact that deepens their long-standing security ties. For a country spread across more than 300 islands in the South Pacific, defense agreements are never just about military hardware. They're about who you trust when the weather turns, and the Pacific has had its share of turning weather, both literal and political. Fiji sits at a crossroads of influence in the region, where larger powers have long competed for partnership and presence. This pact with Australia signals a continued choosing, not a rejection of others, but a reaffirmation of a relationship that stretches back through peacekeeping missions, cyclone relief, and shared concern for the ocean that connects them. What the agreement contains in its specifics isn't yet public in full, but the gesture itself speaks clearly enough. In Suva, where the government works beneath the palms and the harbor light, this is the kind of news that settles into the background of daily life. Important, yes, but measured against the rhythm of a nation that has always understood its own smallness on the map and its own significance in the sea. And so the pact takes its place among the quieter currents that shape life here, moving beneath the surface of things, steady as the tide. Liechtenstein sits tucked between Switzerland and Austria, a country so small you could cross it in an afternoon and still have time for a long lunch. It has no airport of its own, no national currency either. The Swiss franc does the work, and yet by most measures it ranks among the wealthiest places on earth. There's something quietly remarkable about that. A country that has chosen, or simply accepted, that it doesn't need every trapping of sovereignty to thrive. It uses another nation's money. If you want to fly there, you land in Zurich and drive. And still, the principality prospers, a place of alpine villages, financial institutions, and a population smaller than many towns. This week, its name surfaces in the wider world in small ways. Its women's football team is competing in European qualifiers facing Bosnia and Herzegovina, a reminder that even the smallest nations send their players onto the field. Prince Alois, who handles the day-to-day duties of the principality, met with India's Prime Minister Modi at an AI summit, a conversation between one of the world's largest nations and one of its smallest. And somewhere in the diplomatic notes, Turkmenistan formally established ties with Liechtenstein, two countries finding each other across a long stretch of continent. If you're still with me, picture it tonight: a valley in the Alps, lights coming on in villages as the dark settles. A country that has made its own quiet arrangement with the world, No airport, no currency, no particular hurry. Just a small place, doing well enough and carrying on into the night. Iran is living through its sixth straight night of American airstrikes, with bridges struck and the Strait of Hormuz at the center of an expanding campaign. The headlines frame it as a war neither America nor Iran can win, and that quiet assessment may be the most honest thing being said. The United States has broadened its attacks. Iran has warned of a wider war and threatened regional infrastructure in return. Each escalation invites the next, and the rhythm of strike and response has settled into something grimly familiar. Yet even now, a threat of something else. Iran released an American citizen held since 2024, what President Trump called a goodwill gesture. In the middle of a conflict that knows no end, that single act of letting someone go feels worth noticing. Not because it changes the war, but because it reminds us that the people inside it are still capable of other choices. The Iran nuclear deal, once a careful architecture for peace, now stands as a question. What remains of it as the fighting goes on? Saudi Arabia, mid-transformation, finds its future reshaped by a war next door. For the people of Iran, this is not strategy. Bridges are real things. The strait is water where lives are lived. The infrastructure both sides threaten is the scaffolding of ordinary days. If you're still with me, let that sit for a moment. The names behind these headlines are families trying to sleep through another night of sounds no one should have to hear. Central African Republic has been living with a fragile calm, and the United Nations is beginning to ease its presence in response. The security gains are real but delicate, and the decision to shrink the UN footprint reflects both progress and the uncertainty that still lingers. For years, international peacekeepers have been a visible part of life here, and their gradual drawdown will be watched closely by communities that have known too much instability. The challenges haven't gone away. The UN has released emergency funds to fight cholera, a reminder that humanitarian needs persist even as the security picture shifts. Disease and displacement don't follow timelines, and the people here know that better than anyone. There are small signs of continuity too. Mauritania has sent a new ambassador to present credentials, the kind of diplomatic routine that matters more than it might seem in a country working to steady itself. The word fragile carries weight in Central African Republic. It acknowledges what has been achieved without pretending the work is done. The UN stepping back slightly is both a vote of confidence and a test, and the country will carry that test forward in its own time, at its own pace. The Philippines has inaugurated the world's largest integrated solar and battery storage project, a distinction that sounds technical until you sit with what it means. Solar panels, as you know, only generate when the sun is up. Battery storage changes that. It holds the power from daylight hours and releases it after dark, when homes and hospitals and streetlights need it most. To build the largest facility of this kind anywhere in the world is to make a substantial bet. Not a loud one, but a serious one. The Philippines sits in a region where energy demand keeps climbing, where typhoons test every kind of infrastructure, and where the shift away from fossil fuels carries genuine urgency. A project like this doesn't fix everything, but it shows a country thinking ahead, pairing ambition with the engineering to carry it through. For communities nearby, it means cleaner power and steadier supply. For the rest of us, it's one more sign that renewable energy has moved from promise to something concrete, built, operating, real. If you're still with me, picture those panels under a wide tropical sky, gathering the heat of the day and keeping it in reserve. Light held for later. That's an image worth carrying into the night. Kyrgyzstan has been building, and it shows. In the first half of this year, the country's economy grew by nearly 12%, a figure that catches the eye even for a region accustomed to movement. The engines behind it were construction and industry, the kind of growth you can see in cranes over a city and hear in the hum of factories finding their rhythm. For a mountainous country in Central Asia, that kind of pace matters. It means new roads, new buildings, new work. It comes alongside other signs of steady footing, inflation holding even, public sector reforms quietly taking root, preparations underway for the World Nomad Games, which will bring visitors and attention to a nation proud of its heritage. There are notes of caution, too. Industrial activity has eased in recent months, a reminder that growth rarely moves in a straight line. But the broader picture for now is one of momentum, not loud, not flashy, but real. The sort of progress that happens brick by brick, shift by shift, in places that don't always make the headlines. If you're still with me, hold that image for a moment. A country in the mountains building something, and then we'll move on, gently, to wherever the night takes us next. Bangladesh is looking ahead to fresh talks with the International Monetary Fund on a new program, even as the IMF signals that growth there is slowing. It's a quiet but significant moment for a country whose economy has been one of South Asia's fastest moving in recent years. Garment exports, remittances, infrastructure, all pulling forward together. Now the pace is easing, and the conversation with the IMF suggests Dhaka is thinking carefully about what comes next. These program talks are still ahead, so the details aren't settled, but the direction is clear enough. Bangladesh wants a steady hand on the tiller while global headwinds, energy costs, inflation, softer demand work their way through. An IMF program isn't a crisis signal. It's often a country choosing structure and support over drift, choosing to plan rather than react. For ordinary families, slower growth can mean fewer new jobs, tighter budgets, a little more caution at the market. For a government, it means harder choices about where to spend and where to wait. Bangladesh has been here before in different forms, and each time it has found its way through with a mix of pragmatism and patience. If you're still with me, think of this as a pause, a country taking stock, checking its footing, and preparing to sit down with the world's lender of last resort about the road ahead. The talks will come. And Bangladesh, as it has done before, will keep moving, perhaps a little slower, but still moving. The Dominican Republic has made clear it will not send troops to join the anti-gang force operating in Haiti. It's a decision that carries weight, because these two nations share the island of Hispaniola, and what happens on one side is never far from the other. Haiti has been dealing with armed groups that have upended daily life for many of its people, and an international effort has been working to push back against that instability. But the Dominican government has decided its soldiers will not be part of that effort, a line drawn carefully with sovereignty and security both in mind. The relationship between these neighbors is long and layered. Trade crosses the border. Families cross the border. History, both shared and separate, runs deep. And for Dominicans, Haiti's troubles are not something happening far away. They are next door. The border is a real place, and uncertainty on one side reaches the other. And yet the choice here is to remain a neighbor without becoming a combatant, to help, perhaps in other ways, but not to send troops into someone else's fight. The Dominican Republic has settled on its answer. And the quiet that follows is not indifference. It's a nation deciding where its boundaries are, even as it keeps watch over what unfolds just across the line. Tonga has been thinking about homecoming. The government has launched a policy aimed at helping Tongans who have been living overseas return and settle back into island life. It's a familiar pattern across the Pacific. People leave for work, for study, for family. sometimes for years, sometimes for decades. And then, for all kinds of reasons, they come back. What sounds simple, coming home, can be more complicated than you'd expect. Schools, healthcare, work, the rhythm of daily life after years away. The policy is meant to smooth that path, to make the return feel less like starting over and more like being welcomed back. There's something quietly significant about a country saying plainly that it wants to make room for the people who left. Tonga's population is small, and every person who returns brings skills, stories, connections built in faraway places. A reminder of how far Tongan communities have spread these days. The first Tongan is set to serve in the Utah Senate. So this policy is, in its way, a kind of invitation. Not a grand gesture, but a practical one. A recognition that home isn't just where you're from, it's a place that has to hold you when you come back. And in Tonga, they're trying to make sure it does. In Georgia, the state's flagship Institute of Technology has received a commitment to launch a new center dedicated to artificial intelligence and health innovation. Georgia Tech, as it's known, sits in the heart of Atlanta, and for years it has been a place where engineering and medicine have quietly found common ground. This new center, still in its early stages, would bring those two worlds closer together, using AI to think through problems in healthcare that have long resisted easy answers. The details are still taking shape. What we know is that a commitment has been made and that the work ahead will focus on where machine learning and human health meet. It's the kind of announcement that doesn't make a lot of noise but matters in the long run, the sort of thing that years from now might be part of how a hospital in rural Georgia or a clinic in downtown Atlanta cares for the people who walk through its doors. If you're still with me, you might think of it as a seed planted in good soil. Georgia Tech has a habit of tending those seeds carefully, and in a state where healthcare access can vary widely depending on where you live, the idea that technology might help bridge some of that gap feels worth carrying into the night. In the United Kingdom, the government has done something unusual and deliberate. It has taken British steel into public ownership, nationalizing the company, which had been owned by Chinese interests, in order to protect the country's ability to make its own steel. Steel is one of those industries that sits beneath everything else. The bones of bridges, the frames of buildings, the rails that trains run on, all of it begins in a steelworks, in enormous heat, in the patient work of turning raw material into something a country can build with. When a nation can no longer make its own steel, something quietly shifts. It becomes dependent, in a fundamental way, on elsewhere. So the decision to step in, to take the company under the government's wing, is not a small one. Nationalization is rare these days, a word that belongs to another era of post-war reconstruction and state planning. And yet here it is again, chosen not out of ideology, but out of a sense that some things simply cannot be allowed to slip away. The details of how this will unfold, the costs, the timelines, the workforce, will settle in the weeks and months to come. But for now, the furnaces keep burning, and in a country that has spent decades watching its heavy industries shrink, that matters more than you might think. Sometimes the quietest decisions are the ones that hold a place together. In Chad, a quiet change has come to the Diocese of Sar, a Catholic community in the south of the country, where Pope Leo XIV has accepted the retirement of its bishop and appointed a Capuchin priest to take his place. Sar sits along the Cherry River, southeast of the capital, N'Djamena. It's a town in a country where Christians and Muslims live side by side, and where the Catholic Church has long kept a small but steady presence, running schools, clinics, and parishes that serve communities far from any seat of power. The Capuchins are a Franciscan order known for simplicity and for a willingness to work in remote places. To appoint one of their own as bishop suggests a continuation of that spirit, a shepherd chosen from among those who already know the terrain. We don't know yet what the outgoing bishop's legacy will be, or what priorities his successor will carry into the role. These transitions in the church are often quieter than the world notices. A letter read at Mass, a handshake at the cathedral, a new name on the parish letterhead. But for the Catholics of SAR, it marks a turning. A familiar voice steps back and a new one steps forward. And in a country that has known more than its share of turbulence, that kind of quiet handover, orderly, expected, gentle, is its own small story of continuity. Israel has long counted on steady support from the United States, and for decades that support held with a kind of quiet certainty across both major American parties. These days, that certainty is being tested. In the House of Representatives, Democratic leaders faced a rare divide over a vote to cut off American aid to Israel. It wasn't a fracture that appeared overnight. Surveys have shown Democratic voters moving away from Israel for some time, but the vote made the shift visible in a way that couldn't be ignored. The divide runs deep enough that Senator John Fetterman of Pennsylvania said he would leave the Democratic Party if it officially became anti-Israel. It was the kind of statement that measures how personally this question cuts. Meanwhile, the Senate has stalled a major defense bill that includes a significant Israel provision, with critics using language as strong as treason. None of this settles anything, but it marks something. An alliance built over generations is now being weighed openly, argued about in public, voted on in ways that would have seemed unlikely not long ago. For Israel, the relationship with the United States remains, but the ground beneath it is shifting, and people are watching carefully to see where it settles. Egypt has been in the news for an arrangement with the International Monetary Fund, the kind of agreement that, on paper, looks like a vote of confidence. The headlines call it a success, and in the narrow sense, it is. A deal reached, a path sketched, a signal to investors that the country is steadying itself. But beneath that success, observers say, sits a harder question. The economic model that brought Egypt to this point, heavy state spending, a dominant public role in commerce, a currency under pressure, hasn't fundamentally changed. The IMF deal may ease the immediate strain, but it doesn't resolve the structure underneath. For ordinary Egyptians, this is not abstract. Inflation has been biting. The cost of daily life has climbed in ways that reshape households quietly, over months, and so the agreement lands in two registers at once: relief for the moment and uncertainty about what comes after. There's no simple reading of it. Egypt is a country of more than 100 million people, with deep resources and deep challenges, and the distance between a headline about economic success and the texture of daily life can be considerable. What remains for now is a country that has bought itself time and the open question of what it will build with it. Pakistan sits at a complicated crossroads these days, neighbors to Iran, tied by geography and faith to the Gulf, and watchful of every tremor that runs through the Strait of Hormuz. So when tensions between the United States and Iran sharpened, Islamabad did what it has often tried to do. It stepped forward, not loudly, but with a steady hand. Pakistani officials urged both Washington and Tehran to end the violence and return to technical-level talks, the kind of quiet, detailed diplomacy that doesn't make headlines but sometimes keeps ships moving and skies clear. There's real worry behind the call. Pakistan has no appetite for being pulled into someone else's confrontation. The wider region is already frayed enough. A conflict that closes the strait or draws in more players would reach far, to fuel prices, to trade routes, to the ordinary pace of life in places that have nothing to do with the quarrel itself. What's striking is the tone. Pakistan isn't grandstanding. It's asking for de-escalation, for conversation, for the patient work of negotiation to resume. In a moment when a lot of voices are loud, that's a quieter kind of courage. The willingness to say, sit down, talk, find the technical ground where agreement might still be possible. If you're still with me, it's worth holding that thought. A country that could choose to shout has chosen to ask, and sometimes, in the long hour of the night, that's where the real work begins. Eritrea sits along the Red Sea in the Horn of Africa, a small country with layers of history older than its borders. These days, it is quietly working to safeguard its living heritage, the traditions, crafts, songs, and practices that communities carry forward by hand and by voice rather than by writing them down. UNESCO reports that Eritrea is strengthening its national capacity to protect this heritage, building the knowledge and structures to make sure what passes between generations doesn't thin out or disappear. Living heritage is fragile in a way that old buildings are not. It lives in people. When a language stops being spoken, when a craft loses its last practitioners, when a ceremony fades, that's a loss you can't reconstruct from a photograph or a museum case. So a country choosing to invest in keeping these things alive is a country paying attention to what holds its communities together. Eritrea has highland villages, coastal towns, and many distinct peoples, each with their own ways of marking the seasons, telling stories, making music. The work of safeguarding all of that is slow and unglamorous. It doesn't grab attention the way politics or conflict does. But it asks a simple, steady question: what do we want our grandchildren to still know how to do? And then it tries to make sure the answer isn't silence. Lesotho, the mountain kingdom landlocked inside South Africa, is watching a familiar story take a difficult turn. For generations, Basotho have crossed the border to find work, in mines, on farms, in cities not their own. It was never an easy arrangement, but it was a steady one. Now, more nationals are coming home, and the economy is straining to absorb them. The headline is plain, and the reality behind it less so. Jobs were already scarce. Opportunities for young people have long been thin. And when workers return, whether because contracts ended or because life across the border grew harder, they come back to a country where the work simply isn't waiting. If you're still with me, picture the highlands at dusk. Villages perched on ridges, families reuniting, and beneath that warmth, a quiet anxiety. How does a small economy create room for everyone who needs it? It's the kind of question that doesn't answer itself overnight. Lesotho has weathered hard seasons before. The people here know something about endurance, about making do in thin air and on thin margins. But this particular pressure, the slow tide of return and the shortage of work, asks something difficult of the country. Not just policy, but patience. Not just planning, but hope held carefully. The night settles over Maseru, and the question remains open, unhurried, and shared. Germany is considering a change to its law, one that would make it illegal to deny Israel's right to exist. The proposal sits at a place where history, memory, and conscience meet, and in Germany, those three are never far apart. The country has long carried a particular responsibility toward Israel, rooted in the horrors of the Holocaust and the obligations of remembrance that followed. What's being discussed would give that responsibility a sharper legal edge. Denying Israel's right to exist could join other forms of speech already prohibited under German law, not merely discouraged, but punishable. For some, this is a necessary step, a way of ensuring that old hatreds don't find new language. For others, it raises familiar questions about where the line falls between protecting dignity and limiting expression. That conversation is still unfolding. What's clear is that Germany continues to grapple with how best to honor its past while navigating the pressures of the present. and how to carry memory forward in a way that still holds. It's a quiet kind of reckoning, the sort that doesn't make a great noise but sits in the bones of a nation. And that question, how to honor what came before while facing what lies ahead, is one the country will keep sitting with as the night settles in. And that's the world for tonight. Wherever you are, whatever tomorrow holds, rest easy. The world will keep turning slowly while you sleep, and we'll take another quiet trip around it tomorrow night. Good night.